Hi everyone, my name is Kristin Juhrs. I'm the Senior Accessibility Instructional Designer at the University of Alabama. Today, I'll be covering designing accessible group and fieldwork. When I think about designing accessible group and fieldwork, I like to think about it in terms of accessibility touch points, or key areas that we need to consider when making something accessible. The key areas are materials, resources, and tools, communication and collaboration, tasks, and deliverables. So let's look at that first group together: materials, resources, and tools. The first thing you want to check is to make sure that all of your documents, websites, web tools, apps, computer programs, images, videos, and audio files that students use are fully WCAG 2.0 AA compliant. And while it's useful to know what that means, you don't necessarily need to know the ins and outs of all of it. The main thing to know is that the standard that everything needs to meet is WCAG 2.0 AA compliant. So when you reach out to publishers, you can ask whether or not those web tools, apps, computer programs, other things like that are fully WCAG 2.0 AA compliant. If they are, that's great. You should feel really good about including them in your courses. If they're not, it's something you need to consider, because that may mean that the course tools that you want to use are not as accessible as they need to be for your students. So when you create the document, though, how can you make sure it's as accessible as possible? There are lots of trainings on this. I'm not going to get into all the details, but here are some quick tips that will help make things a little more accessible. The first thing to consider is using Microsoft products whenever possible. Microsoft products like Word, PowerPoint, Excel are built accessibly for the user, the person making the thing, but they're also built accessibly so that the person who reads and uses these finished products, these finished documents that you create, then make sure that it's as accessible for them as well. Try to avoid PDFs whenever possible. PDFs are great, everybody likes to use them, but they are difficult to make accessible, and typically they aren't very accessible on their own. So if you do use PDFs, try to also include an accessible version or an alternative format for each PDF. Websites, web tools, apps, and computer programs. Like I said, you can reach out to the publisher to find out whether or not everything is accessible. If they are, great. If they're not, it's something to consider. But keep in mind that the person who's held accountable for their accessibility is the educational institution, not the publishers or the creators of each platform. So if things aren't as accessible as they claim that it is, you unfortunately will be held as accountable as the school, not the publisher. Now, one thing you can do is you can test these things for accessibility, but if you don't have the bandwidth for that at this time, again, asking is better than not asking. And it usually gives you more information than you would have had otherwise about the accessibility of those products. And it'll help you make a more informed decision. Videos, audio files also need to be made accessible. So there are one of two things that need to happen in order for them to be considered accessible enough. It either needs to have captioning or it needs to have a transcript. So captioning is great. It actually is what most people prefer because it allows the person who's reading the captions to follow along with the visuals of the video. The problem with captioning is that it's very expensive to have done, and the automatic captioning through things like YouTube and other things are not considered reliable enough to use to meet the legal requirement necessary for captioning. So keep in mind that the accuracy of the captioning matters a lot. Now, one cheap way of handling the captioning problem, if you don't have enough money to even have a video caption professionally, is to write a script and then have the person follow that script in their videos. And then with that script, you make a Word document out of it, and that Word document becomes the transcript for that video, which meets that legal requirement. You're not necessarily required to caption things. You are just required to provide either a transcript or a captioned version. So that transcript or that Word document of that script would be enough to meet that legal requirement. So that's what a lot of people do when they're on a budget. Images are also in need of accessibility. So you need to provide alternative text or text describing what's happening in the picture unless the picture is decorative. Words and images don't get read by screen readers, so you will need to have word for word rewrites of all those things in a Word document or an alternative text if the information in that image is pertinent to the learning or has any helpful information in it. So anything like a table or an infographic or a chart, you would need to retype all that information and provide that to students. Communication and collaboration is super important when it comes to group work. So there are a few ways that I like to break that down. I like to think about it in terms of how can we make sure that students have the most amount of options to come up with what works best for them as a group for communicating with one another. Some groups prefer to communicate via email, text message, that sort of thing. Visual collaboration like Google Docs, Word document slides, that sort of thing. Blackboard discussion boards, Blackboard Messenger, Slack, which will become accessible by January 1st of 2021. So I wouldn't use it until then. Text messaging and chat rooms, right? But some groups prefer to work in an audio-visual format. So you could have them use things like FaceTime, Zoom, Collaborate, GoToMeeting. But keep in mind, if you do have them collaborate audio-visually, if you have a student in that group who has visual disabilities, everybody in that group needs to agree to read and say everything out loud that they type or show, so that that student would have the same access to the information that they're discussing. If a student is in that group who has auditory disabilities, it's important that the university provide accommodations for that, like live captioning. So those are some important considerations for any type of audiovisual collaboration. You can also have audio collaboration, like using things like VoiceThread. But again, keep in mind that if someone has an audio disability in that group, we need to make sure that we provide something like captioning to that student. But they can also do things like TTY calls or conference calls, and TTY allows a person with audio disabilities to have a transcript of that phone call or captioning of that phone call. So there are lots of different options for everybody. Again, allowing the group to choose which modality works best for them not only works best for that group and gives them the most amount of opportunities for success, but it also helps the student with disabilities because they don't feel like they're being asked to do one modality or another. They're choosing whatever they feel like would work best for them as well. So it really works best for everybody when they have the most amount of options possible for collaboration. Tasks. So tasks are super important, especially when it comes to field work and group work. The main thing to think about when it comes to tasks, though, is what is the learning? Sometimes the task is the learning. Like if the learning is riding a bike, then you're going to have to ride a bike. But often the task is just a vehicle to get to the learning, right? So in those cases, allowing students to have more than one option for how to get to that learning can be best at providing accessibility and also helping just with the universal design of the course and helping everybody improve their learning and learning in the way that works best for them in whatever format that takes. Again, you want to measure the learning, not the modality for demonstrating the learning. So if the learning is learning how to write, then obviously they're going to have to write something. But if the learning is what they learned on a field assignment, then the writing isn't necessarily the learning. The writing is just a modality for sharing that information, but also providing an assignment that allows students to make a video instead or an audio recording discussing what they learned. Could be another way of having them share that information that might help students better show their learning or demonstrate their learning in a way that works best for them. So not only does that help students with disabilities, but it actually helps everybody across the board. deliverables and presentations. So especially in the days of COVID, there are more distance education video presentations than ever. And I think that this is a great time to discuss how we can make sure that the prompts that we provide students set the presentations up for the most accessibility things possible. Because if the presentations are not accessible, then the students who are watching those presentations or are supposed to be learning from them won't be able to benefit from their peers learning. So we want to make sure that everybody has accessible presentations. So the first thing we need to do is say, if you include any images, charts, or anything anyone would need to see in your video, describe it in detail out loud so that everyone can enjoy your video. So including that in your prompt does two things. First of all, it helps students with visual disabilities who cannot see the screen and require those auditory descriptions to learn what's happening. It allows them to have that information. But the second thing it does is it helps instructors and other students who may not be able to make out what's happening or being shown on the screen due to low video quality. We can't always guarantee that our students are going to have the best video quality out there. So having them demonstrate their learning through that video, but then also having them provide that auditory description could be helpful for everyone, just in case there are some quality issues with the video. We need to ask our students not to include any flashing or flickering in their video that occurs more than 3 times per second. And the reason why is because that can cause students to have seizures. Another thing that we need to do is one of the following. So either or. So either you ask for live videos, we need to ask that you if you require accommodations like closed captioning, you are required to contact the Office of Disability Services and your professor to coordinate closed captioning prior to the due date. If it's a live video, we need to ask that live video sessions like Zoom and Collaborate are not automatically captioned. If you require accommodation for videos like closed captioning, you're required to contact the Office of Disability Services and your professor to coordinate live closed captioning for the live video session. If you don't want to do closed captioning because your university is on a budget, another option you have is to ask students to provide a word-for-word copy of their script of the presentation. So that is asking students to provide the transcript of what they're presenting on, and that's an accessible way of them sharing a caption or not caption, but a transcribed version of their videos. And that also meets that legal requirement. So you either do the transcript idea or you do the captioning. You don't need to do both. Now, those two things have added benefits. If the audio quality is bad, it allows the professors to more easily determine what's being said in the video. The second thing that it does, which is pretty great, is it says, hey, for students who had trouble making out what someone was saying, it allows them to better hear what's happening in the video as well, so they can read that transcript. So it's really helpful for everybody. Audio presentations, it's the same thing that we just discussed. Again, you either have it captioned and you provide prompts saying that they need to contact the Office of Disability Services to have it captioned, if that's a requirement that they have, or you ask students to include a script of their presentation. Slide presentations. I recommend using PowerPoint and requiring students to use PowerPoint because it is the most accessible presentation format. Some presentation formats cannot be read by screen readers, and that means that students with visual disabilities would not be able to access each other's presentations, which would be a problem for accessibility. There are a couple other things we need to require students to do. The first thing is that they need to use standard formats like font formats like Arial, Times New Roman, Veranda, etc. The main reason why is because screen readers can't read some formats or fonts that aren't standard. The other thing that we need to make sure is that they don't use a font size smaller than 12 point. And the reason is because students with low vision typically can't see fonts that are smaller than 12 point. And some learning disabilities benefit from larger font sizes. If you include images like photographs, charts, and other images and infographics, you're required to provide a typed description of each image with the information provided in the image. Screen readers can't read words and images, so that's why that's important. And they also can't tell what's happening in photographs. It benefits instructors and other students who may not always be able to make out what's being shown in an image due to low image quality. Sometimes when we put images in Word documents or PowerPoints or presentations, it can change the quality of the image and can distort it enough to make it difficult to read. If you narrate your presentation, include a typed copy or transcript of your audio presentation. This benefits instructors and students who may not be able to make out what is being said in the presentation due to low sound quality. Also, do not include any flashing or flickering in your presentation that occurs more than 3 times per second. Again, that can cause students to have seizures. Image presentations. So if you include images like photographs, charts, infographics, that sort of thing, you need to make sure that everything is, that students are required to provide a typed description of each image with all the information provided. Again, images can't be read by screen readers, and also screen readers don't know what is in photographs, so they would have to have that provided to them. And again, it benefits everybody who, we don't know what the quality of these images is going to be, so sometimes it's hard to see what they want you to see in them. It's not always clear if the image quality is high enough for you to make out what's happening, so it's, again, helpful for everybody. So these are just some easy, quick tips that you can use to make sure that your group work and field work is more accessible. I really want to thank everybody for tuning in to this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me at kwjuhrs@ua.edu. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope I hear from all of you soon.